This short lecture will cover rites of passage and how they sometimes come up against human rights, using the case study of female genital cutting as a rite of passage. I will compare it to male initiation rites as well as male circumcision to make the case that we should look at cultural rights as well as human rights. And I end with a short discussion of some of the things that have been successful in changing practices that violate bodily integrity but still uphold the right to culture and religion. Ethnocentrism is the belief that your culture, religion, ethnicity, or race is superior. It also entails judging others based on what you value as good, normal, moral, etc. So we try to understand cultural practices based on that culture's measures of what is good, normal, and moral. In order to understand individual practices, we must look to the culture in which they are found. However, cultural relativism, as this method is called, is not the same as moral relativism, which would preclude the existence of universal human rights. There are some things that are considered wrong by most people, and this is what the United Nations and others who work in the field of human rights seek to enforce. But can there be a universal human rights if there are cultures that have practices that others find offensive or immoral? Slavery was practiced in European societies for centuries. It is still practiced in some places, although it is against international law. The Tuareg with whom I work still have a servant class of people that many would describe as slaves, for instance. The separation of castes of people is common in India as well, and it goes back to teachings in Hindu sacred texts. Today we'll be talking about female genital cutting, often called female genital mutilation, that many believe is a violation of young women's human rights to bodily integrity. But it is also an important rite of passage in societies where it is practiced. The point is, human rights often run into the limits of cultural relativism, and we will explore these today. A rite of passage is defined as a series of rituals that move an individual from one social state or status to another. Can you think of any? A social status can be moving from, say, single person to a married person, or a high school student to a graduate. Both a wedding and a graduation ceremony would be considered rites of passage. They are a ritual that many of you are probably familiar with. A ritual is defined as a symbolic set of actions. They are patterned, repetitive, and symbolic enactments of cultural beliefs or values. Rites of passage are particular types of ritual that transform both society's perception of the individual as well as the individual's sense of self. Arnold van Gennep, a folklorist, found in cultural analyses that rites of passage tend to all go through a predictable set of stages, which are separation, transition, and incorporation. Take the example of a typical wedding in the United States. The first stage of separation can be when the bride and groom are separated from the observers and the others in the wedding party. Generally, they wear special clothing that symbolically separates them, and in fact, if the bride is wearing a white dress and a veil, these also have symbolism involved in them. When they are standing at the altar, they are in the stage of transition. They are neither married nor single. They are moving from one social status to another. The final stage happens when they finish their vows and re-enter society as a married couple. That is their new status. Cross-culturally, male initiation rites tend to validate male dominance in one way or another. Again, these types of rites of passage often will signal and legitimate a change of status from child to adult, or in this case, from boy to man. They often involve an extended period of separation during which the initiates learn the beliefs, skills, and knowledge necessary to participate as a functioning adult in their society. Some examples may include fraternity and military hazing, a bar mitzvah for Orthodox Jews, the Maasai Emirata and Eminyata, in which the Maasai, who are an East African minority of pastoralists, go through several stages of initiation. In the ceremony called the Emirata, young boys are circumcised around the age of 12, after which they go through a special period of separation called the Eminyata, where these boys live in a village learning the ways of the warrior. Among the Mende of Sierra Leone and Liberia, the Poro ceremony, where young men are initiated into a secret society, have rituals whose primary purpose is to regulate sexual identity and social conduct, and to mediate relations with the spirit world. Part of this initiation involves scarification. It is actually quite common for male initiation ceremonies to involve some kind of painful feat, as David Gilmour found in his cross-cultural studies. Research on female initiation rites indicates that there is quite a bit of cross-cultural variability, but they are generally performed at menarche, a girl's first menstruation. They appear to occur in more societies than male initiation rites, perhaps because of the fact of menstruation signaling a biological change in a girl's body. Genital modifications are one example, as they are a rite of passage that are enacted in order to transform girls into marriageable women. They occur in Africa, North America, Central America, South America, the Middle East, Oceania, and Australia. And archaeological and historical evidence shows that they were done in Egypt dating to about 2000 BCE. Genital modifications include male and female forms, and there are many different types which relate to different cultural beliefs and practices, which we will explore in the next couple of slides. There are a number of male types of genital modifications, including incision, circumcision, this is where the foreskin is cut or torn away. There's also skin scraping, subincision, and superincision. You can read the definitions on this slide for more detail. There are also 4 types of female modifications which have been categorized by the World Health Organization. Up to 3 million girls a year are subject to the first 3 types, according to certain estimates. Type 1 is called clitoridectomy or sunna. This is the removal of the tip of the prepuce or hood of the clitoris. It can also include the total removal of the clitoris. Sunna translates to mean, quote, following the tradition of the Prophet, though Islamic scholars state that there is no such prescription in the Quran. It is the least common, found in the Sudan, parts of Egypt, and recently has made its way to Indonesia and Malaysia. Type 2, called excision, involves ablation of the clitoris and labia minora, the inner vaginal lips. Ablation means reduction or removal by surgery or by cutting or scraping. Outer labia are kept intact and the vaginal opening remains untouched. This is common in West Africa where I work, and the French use the term excision to mean all types. Type 3, infibulation or pharaonic circumcision, is considered the most extreme and involves removal of all external genitalia, including prepuce, clitoris, labia minora, and labia majora, which are the outer vaginal lips. The 2 sides are sewn together to leave a small opening for urination and menstruation. There are risks in all types of modification, but there are many problems that occur specifically with type 3 because of urine and blood retention and extreme trouble in childbearing, as the scar tissue must be cut open to allow for the birth, and then it is resewn and recut for each subsequent birth. Type 4 includes all other forms of modification, including stretching the clitoris or labia, piercing, the husband stitch, where women are sewn up 1 extra stitch after childbirth, and plastic surgery. Female genital blank. What we call these practices in the US and elsewhere carries with it some preconceived notions. When something is called a mutilation, what comes to mind? How about circumcision? Or just cutting? What about operation? In my opinion, none of these is quite right. So I generally say genital modification. There are some extreme forms, but mutilation connotes intended bodily harm. The women who are performing these are not intending to harm the young girls. Instead, where they are traditionally practiced, they are viewed as essential coming-of-age rituals. They are intended to preserve a girl's virginity before marriage, ensure cleanliness, to symbolize her role as a marriageable member of society, and to emphasize her moral and economic value to her patrilineage. Quote, for Westerners to condemn the practice unilaterally does little good, as mothers who bring their daughters for the operation believe they are doing the right thing. Abu Sharaf. Ruqayya Mustafa Abu Sharaf is a Sudanese anthropologist and senior research associate at the Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women at Brown University. She says, in the article you read for this week, that we must learn from history before we, meaning mostly Europeans and Americans, go in to change a practice such as FGM. She points out that colonial European powers also tried to abolish the practice, and this created resistance. When Western feminists have tried to do this, it has been seen as a form of neocolonialism. But it is changing, as you will see in the film, The Cut. If women are to enjoy full human rights, many agree that female genital modifications need to end, much as Abu Sharaf believes. It is considered a human rights violation according to the UN Declaration on Human Rights, Article 5, which states, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, as well as the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 24, Part 3, which states, parties shall take all effective and appropriate measures with a view to abolishing traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. FGM is considered a violation of human rights and bodily integrity. However, people also have a protected right of freedom of cultural expression, which in Article 18 of the Declaration of Human Rights states that people have a right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Something to make note of, however, is that universal human rights discourse assumes that the rights of the individual are universal and apparent. In many societies, individualism is not the point of life. Rather, people understand themselves to be part of a community. They are a member of a family or kin group, a tribe or clan, etc. Anthropologists do their best to not alter the societies in which they work. How can universal human rights exist in a culturally diverse world? As the international community becomes increasingly integrated, how can cultural diversity and integrity be respected? Is a global culture possible? And whose culture would be used as the standard? Wouldn't that be ethnocentric? We know that culture is not monolithic, that culture changes, and that it can also be contested by those within it. But as many fight against FGM, we can also turn the mirror on the U.S. Is it different from other forms of modification? Male circumcision is still widely practiced on babies in the U.S., and yet the UN makes no statement against it, and it isn't outlawed anywhere, though there are some hospitals that will not perform circumcisions anymore. The reasoning behind circumcision has changed over time, but it started with religious beliefs among the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity. But other reasons have been given that may or may not be true from a medical standpoint, such as being easier to clean or safeguarding against sexually transmitted infections. Some say that it is about controlling male sexuality as well. But there are problems associated with it, even though it is done by surgeons in most cases, such as severe pain, psychological distress, interrupted maternal bonding, which is associated with problems breastfeeding, and there's also a loss of sensation when the foreskin is removed, not to mention a lack of consent. Today, many women and men are fighting against FGM, But what are the most productive ways to do so? Should Westerners simply condemn the practice and arrest those who perform them? Some of the best ways that activists have found come from women within the cultures that perform the cutting. These involve alternate customs, other types of occupational training for those who do the procedure, which in some places is one of the few jobs that women can perform for pay. Educational campaigns by locals as well as media campaigns by local activists have all proven very effective. But outsiders as well as insiders must take care, because there are stories that women have been condemned for not having the practice done, as they are assumed to be sexually promiscuous, and this has inhibited their participation in their culture.